Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Royster Doister, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, Robert Meyer Burnett, here with Robservations, the show about something. Robservations episode number 313 from season 2. It is great to have you all here today. Robcasting at you from the Robservatory. Hopefully, I won't be having the streaming issues I've been having in the past, which I hope, we'll see, won't we? We'll see if I've alleviated those problems. Hopefully so, because boy, there's a lot to talk about today, isn't there? Well, I don't know if you think there's a lot to talk about, but I think there's a lot to talk about today. Now, I would like to preface this talk by saying, you know, that I am the Prince of Positivity. And one of the things that I've become known for over these many days I've spent with you at Robservations here is the fact that my exuberance and positivity is infectious. And that's what I would like to portray to the world. As my friend John Campia and compatriot is fond of saying, you should be known for the things that you love, not for the things that you hate. Which I think is absolutely right, unless you're talking about Star Trek Discovery. But even my hatred of that show has become somewhat tongue-in-cheek. Now, as you all know, my thing, my genre thing, I love Star Wars, I love The Twilight Zone, I love UFO, I love so many different things. But I think my first love will always be Star Trek, and I think everybody knows that. I've had a lot of professional dealings with the Star Trek franchise. I've never worked on Star Trek itself in any incarnation, but I've made documentaries. I made a movie with William Shatner. I was a Star Trek consultant for Viacom licensing for a while back in the 90s. So I have a lot of experience with Star Trek, and I love it. I have not loved it over the past 10 years. And in a nutshell, since Bad Robot took over the stewardship of the franchise and gave us Star Trek '09, I feel that the Star Trek franchise, in an effort to become more relevant and in an effort to expand the audience for Star Trek beyond the hardcore fan base that, let's face it, using me as an example, is aging out. And anybody who's trying to sell a product, you want to sell it to the most amount of people you can. So I completely understand that. But I think in doing so, they have tried to fundamentally change what Star Trek at its core is and make it more like something else, as opposed to keeping Star Trek what it was and move it forward. Now, what I've always thought was really interesting about Star Trek, and I've seen this in my own life. Star Trek debuted on September 6th, 1966. It ran for 3 years, obviously, and famously it was going to be canceled after season 2, but a letter-writing campaign spearheaded by the Trimbles, Bijo and I guess her husband John. I don't know if they were married back then, but Bijo Trimble famously launched a letter-writing campaign to get NBC to bring it back. And they did. They brought it back for a third season, but it had a death spot, 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and they brought in Fred Freiberger to produce it. They cut the budget, of course, and season 3 of Star Trek is not considered to be its finest hour, although I do maintain there are a number of terrific episodes in the third season of Star Trek, including a great Romulan episode in the Enterprise incident, a great Klingon episode in Day of the Dove. Then there's some really interesting cost-cutting episodes like The Empath. And there are some fine episodes of Star Trek in the third season, but it went away. And it really wasn't until Star Trek was in strip syndication, meaning it was sold to independent TV stations all over the country, that it found a following. It was popular amongst college students and like-minded people, But it really found a following in the early 70s, beginning in 72 and moving forward. And then we got the animated series, of course, in the 73-74 season. There were 22 episodes of that, 2 seasons. Then, of course, Star Trek The Motion Picture in 1979, Star Trek II in 1982, Star Trek III in 84, Star Trek IV in 86, Star Trek V in 89, the advent of The Next Generation, which debuted in September of 1987. But what was really interesting about Star Trek, at least as far as I was concerned, is as I grew older, literally, I started watching Star Trek, according to my mom, when I was 5. I mean, it had to have been 5. She says I was younger, but I don't believe that I was even aware of TV. But I was aware of Star Trek when it was in strip syndication beginning in the early 70s. And I would watch it. I had a religious fervor for Star Trek, and I had to watch it every night. It was on every night on Channel 11 in the Seattle area from 6 to 7. And I was, a Star Trek fanatic. And truly, but what was really interesting about Star Trek for me was it was a worldview. I wasn't really aware of that until later, but Gilbert is here, ladies and gentlemen. Gilbert has come into the office and he's brought some paper. Gilbert, why do you want to eat that paper? I don't know. How would you like to eat a cookie? I was in the middle of a Star Trek reverie that's going to go on, but since you're here, buddy, and everyone likes you, why don't you come up and get a cookie? Come up. Get a cookie. You're a very well-trained dog. Oh, you're slobbering all over me because... Okay, you want another cookie? All right. And Tallulah gets a cookie too because God knows. Hey, come on, buddy. Okay, you're out there playing. Okay, you get one more cookie, but then you got to get down. All right?
All right, buddy. Yeah, buddy.
Come on. That's I have a nonsensical dog voice.
Yeah, buddy. How's it going, dude? Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy.
Yes, I don't know what it means, but I do know that if I ever use that voice when there are not dogs around, so if Elizabeth and I are driving somewhere and I go, she's like, I'm not a dog. So anyway, I know she's not. She's a very beautiful lady. But anyway, so back to Star Trek. It's always meant a lot to me, but as I grew up, as I was growing older, Star Trek was constantly changing. As, 8, 9, the animated series, actually I was younger than that. Then there was the promise. Star Trek The Motion Picture came out. As I was a teenager, I got Star Trek 2 and 3, of course. I was in college, Star Trek 4 and Next Generation. And what was really interesting was Star Trek, was I saying Star Wars? Star Trek was always moving and evolving forward, as I did. And what was really interesting with the Berman era of Star Trek, and I say Berman era, I know it began with Gene Roddenberry, but when Gene Roddenberry passed away in 1991, Rick Berman took over all of the franchise. And Roddenberry, I know he pulled back even before that. There was no figurehead, but he did create Star Trek. And obviously under the Berman era, we had Next Generation, we had Deep Space Nine, we had Voyager, and we had Enterprise. There was over 18 years of Star Trek, and there's, of course, 4 Next Generation feature films that Rick Berman produced. So 18 seasons of Star Trek for 18 years of Star Trek, 25 seasons, because there were shows running concurrently. And amazing. I, of course, produced the documentaries along with Roger Lay Jr. that appeared on the Star Trek The Next Generation Blu-rays, so I was able to sit down with everybody from Rick Berman on down, Ron Moore, Brandon Braga, all of the cast on the Season 2 Next Generation Blu-rays. You can watch me host a roundtable discussion with the principal cast of Next Generation, including Patrick Stewart himself. And, I've loved Star Trek my whole life. But what I found really interesting and what I think became a big part of Star Trek was with Star Trek The Motion Picture, one of the things that they did that I thought was pretty genius was rather than think about a reboot, they brought all of the television actors who, by the way, Leonard Nimoy, William Shatner, DeForest Kelley, George Takei, Walter Koenig, with James Doohan, and of course Nichelle Nichols, it's not like they were matinee idols. They were not movie stars. They were from TV shows, and they were character actors is really what they were. And they were good actors, but the idea that they were going to headline a giant science fiction epic that had ballooned because of the time they were going to make a Star Trek movie earlier in the 70s called Planet of the Titans, that Ken Adam was production designing. Ralph McQuarrie designed an Enterprise that they later based the Discovery off of that design. That didn't get made. The Star Trek Phase 2 television series, that didn't get made. So what happened with Star Trek The Motion Picture is all of those development costs were wrapped into the motion picture's budget. And it was famously reported at about $44 million. That wasn't necessarily true because the movie didn't cost that, but it was still very, very expensive, and it was locked into its release date. You can read all about this. But Star Trek was always something that, with the beginning, with the menagerie, because what's also interesting about Star Trek is there was a pilot made for Star Trek with Captain Pike as the captain of the Enterprise, with a female number one, first officer, and Spock was the science officer. That was rejected by the network, but in a stroke of genius, when they had a second pilot made, during the first season of Star Trek, they actually utilized, of course, famously, the original pilot, The Cage, as part of a two-part episode, The Menagerie. And in one of the brilliant pieces of canonical world building ever in a movie or television property, Star Trek used this original pilot within its own canonical framework to establish that it had a past. You got to look into Star Trek's past, and rather than throw that pilot out, they said, no, this is over a decade ago, and we're going to show you events that happened. So there was a timeline established of history within Star Trek. So if you were a fan of the show, and this was in the first season of the original series, suddenly Star Trek canon was created. The Enterprise looked different, both internally and externally. The crew makeup was different. The uniforms were different. But because they repurposed the bridge, same bridge set, repainted, changed around. So canon, Star Trek canon, was beautifully established. Now, in Star Trek The Motion Picture, look, I'm one of these people that considers the animated series canon. It was produced by Roddenberry. A lot of the same writers from the original series moved over and worked on the animated show. It won a Daytime Emmy Award for excellence in children's programming. It's truly, look, the animation, very, very crude, very rudimentary, limited animation, but some of the stories for the animated series, including Yesteryear, which the events are considered canonical because of who we met and what we saw. Again, Star Trek canon was being forged even in the animated series. But when we got to Star Trek The Motion Picture in 1979, again, by bringing back the same actors and not rebooting the franchise and putting new actors in the roles, suddenly our characters that now had become hugely popular in the syndicated television landscape of the 70s, came back to the big screen and created and pushed Star Trek canon further. Now, people will say, oh, but Rob, what about the violations? What about the canon violations of the Klingons being changed? The look of the Klingons with these spiny foreheads and all that. Hey, when I saw Star Trek The Motion Picture as a kid, the Federation was made up of many different species. I thought, okay, why wouldn't there be different species within the Klingon Empire? I mean, I understand the Romulan Star Empire and the Klingon Empire were only ever shown to have a certain kind of people in them. Whereas the United Federation of Planets, we had Andorians, we had Tellarites, we had all different kinds of people that made up the Federation. So when I saw Star Trek The Motion Picture as a kid, the Klingon ships were the same. I mean, the Katinga was an evolution of the Klingon D7 that we saw first introduced in the third season, believe it or not, of Star Trek. I bought it. I didn't sit there and go, that's a violation of canon. I'm like, no, we're just seeing part of the Klingon Empire that we've never seen before because now they can afford to do it. But importantly, and the Enterprise, the Starship Enterprise, the refit of the Enterprise, which is still my favorite fictional spaceship ever, even more so than the original, even though the original is my great fetish object. The Enterprise from Star Trek The Motion Picture, when it was redesigned by people like Mike Miner and Andy Probert, a lot of thought went into the interior structure of the ship and where everything was. How did everything work? For the first time, it really established a relationship between the impulse engines and the warp drive and how all those things worked together, where they were. There were cutaway drawings. David Kimball's cutaway drawing of the Enterprise that was sold as a poster was amazing. So there was Star Trek canon. Then, of course, that canon was pushed forward in the Star Trek movies. And by the time you do get to Next Generation in 87, canon was pushed even further. Now, there were some things that didn't make a whole lot of sense. The post-atomic horror Picard talks about in Encounter at Farpoint didn't really jibe with the eugenics wars, but I understand. Still, you incorporate that. Of course, Mark Leonard came back as Sarek, Spock's father, in the 3rd season of Next Generation in the episode Sarek. Of course, DeForest Kelley appeared as an admiral, not by name, but as the admiral. We all know who he was in Encounter at Farpoint. So Star Trek's canonical fictional history was well established. And I've always believed that part of the attraction of Star Trek was this canonical history. Just like I've believed that part of the appeal of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is the history of Middle-earth, the painstakingly crafted history of Middle-earth. The same is true of Westeros. The same is true of Harry Potter. Any franchise that lasts a long period of time, that has a fictional world that you follow, that you believe in, I've always thought one of the great appeals of that is canon. How, since there's been a lot of ink and a lot of bits spilled about how Bad Robot made Star Trek, there was an alternate license they created. Also, what did Bad Robot do? Well, they did something that had never really been done in Star Trek history before. When they made Star Trek 09, they went back in time to show us Kirk, Spock, and McCoy as younger men meeting for the first time at Starfleet Academy. There had been a lot of talk. This has been addressed in fan fiction and also novels, but it had never been seen on screen. But in order to disassociate themselves from, say, pissing off the fan base, they came up with a novel solution. The Kelvin verse was created from an incursion from the future by Nero and his band of brigands who had commandeered a mining ship that had been fitted with, according to the Countdown comics, Borg technology. And that incursion caused an offshoot, the universe, an offshoot of our canonical universe, created the Kelvin verse. And of course, ever since then, Star Trek canon has been under much scrutiny and much debate. I fucking hated all of that, and I thought it was a big mistake. I understand they wanted to go back and reinvent Kirk, Spock, and McCoy for a new generation. But rather than stay true to what Star Trek really was, what they did was they sort of transposed character traits from other places, like Top Gun. Now, you're going to say, Rob, even the characters of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, all of it was based on the works of Horatio, the stories of Horatio Hornblower. Yes, they were. But, I mean, that's cool. But what they did with, and a lot of Star Trek stories, the best Star Trek stories are riffs on other kinds of stories, whether it's Run Silent, Run Deep, and Balance of Terror, things like that. Star Trek has always used other stories and riffs on other stories, so I don't mind that. What I did mind in Star Trek 09 was how, I'm going to tell you, I thought it was very reductive, and Star Trek was really dumbed down, and it was turned into a standard. Well, he's obviously a smart young man, but he's a rebel. He lives outside of society. He's troubled because he didn't have a father because he died, and he's got a mean stepfather who cares more about his vintage 300-year-old car than him. Whatever it was, and there's nothing wrong with character traits like that when you recycle tropes and things like that, but the storyline was pretty brain dead, and it didn't have much to say. And like a lot of, now that we've seen J.J. Abrams' film work, a lot of what was really important about that story was either told in a flashback, mentioned in passing. We just didn't see it on camera. The meat and potatoes, the things that Star Trek traditionally concerned itself with, were secondary to this idea to reinvent Star Trek for a new generation. I understand the impulse. I understand why, but I thought it was ultimately a failure. And if you look at, again, there's been a lot of ink spilled on this too, but if you look at the cost analysis of how much both Star Trek, all three Kelvin movies cost, they never ignited the way other franchises, especially Paramount franchises, if you look at what happened with the Transformers franchise, Star Trek, they were not able to capture a younger audience. People were not waiting for the new Kelvin-verse Star Trek movie the way they say they were Harry Potter. Because ultimately, Star Trek is a franchise that does not belong to a new generation. And, you know, there was just simply not a lot of younger fans. You go to any Star Trek convention, especially the big Star Trek convention in Las Vegas, and you can see that. Sure, there's always going to be new fans, and there are on YouTube. There's a couple of younger fan YouTube channels that I particularly like. But for the most part, Star Trek is an aging fan base, and they keep trying to reinvent it for the modern age to bring in more people. And it really hasn't been working, for the most part. Well, for the first time after Star Trek 09, we have coming up the Star Trek Picard series. And that will be the first time in 10 years that they are going to continue with storylines from the Berman era of Trek. They're bringing back Captain Picard, played by Patrick Stewart. I mean, yes, they did bring Leonard Nimoy back to play Spock, and that was great. I did like seeing that. But again, we're still in an alternate universe. An argument could be made, was that our Spock? I mean, I don't want to get into that, but yeah, it was great to see Leonard Nimoy. They needed Leonard Nimoy because it did give the Kelvinverse some credibility amongst the fan base, which I thought, you know, was a good effort. Good effort. I love seeing Nimoy back, of course. But the new Star Trek Picard series is a direct continuation of Star Trek The Next Generation. Set 30 years later, 20 years later, 20 years after Nemesis. Now there's been a lot of speculation about alternate licenses, but now that CBS and Viacom are under one roof, we're now getting a Picard series that is being made by the same people that have been responsible, for the most part. Alex Kurtzman, who's now the grand poobah as far as Star Trek is concerned, co-wrote Star Trek 09 and co-wrote Star Trek Into Darkness. Well, he is, of course, overseeing the Star Trek franchise. Well, Variety, in their weekly magazine, published an interview with Patrick Stewart. Here's the cover. And by the way, Patrick Stewart looks badass in this. I mean, who doesn't love Patrick Stewart? To know Patrick Stewart is to love Patrick Stewart. I love Patrick Stewart. I think everybody loves Patrick Stewart. Bryan Singer was genius to tap Patrick Stewart to play Xavier for the X-Men movies. I think a lot of people wanted that. I think that was everyone's first choice. And, of course, he was terrific. He's always been terrific. And on X-Men 20 years ago now, X-Men came out in 2000, Patrick Stewart began his 2-decade-long bromance with Ian McKellen. Who doesn't love seeing Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart on social media together? Or I never got to see them on stage together, but who doesn't love them? Who doesn't love them together? But there's a big article in this Variety interview, a profile of Patrick Stewart, where he talks about the upcoming Picard series. I read the article, and it gives me pause. As a Star Trek fan, there are a lot of things in this article that I found concerning. And let me first say, I want Picard to be great. Honestly. So you can see me say this. I really do. It gives me no pleasure at all for the last 10 years of my life, to not love Star Trek. Even when Star Trek was hit and miss for me, Voyager was hit and miss. Enterprise was hit and miss. Star Trek 4 was hit and miss. I like it now. Star Trek 5, of course, hit and miss. Star Trek 3, hit and miss. You know, I haven't loved Star Trek all the time. But I love the franchise. But I'd never actively disliked Star Trek until Star Trek 09. I really, and I'll give you, I've used this example before, but I have a lot of new subscribers or people who might not. They might say, well, Rob, what's one example about what you didn't like about, say, Star Trek 09? And I use this example a lot. Anton Yelchin, who was playing Chekhov, who I loved in Star Trek 09. I thought he was a terrific Chekhov. Well, as many people know, Walter Koenig played Chekhov beginning in the second season of the original series. And he had, let's just say, a questionable Russian accent, right? But within the universe, in Star Trek's universe, and in universe Star Trek, in the position there, nobody ever said to Chekhov, wow, Walter Koenig, you have a terrible Russian accent. Within the Star Trek universe, Chekhov was just Russian. Nobody questioned it. He was from Russia, and there was an ongoing joke where Chekhov would say everything good from human history came from Russia. Nobody was laughing at Chekhov because of his accent. People would laugh with Chekhov when he would tell jokes. Now, this is a very important thing. I'm always the master of verisimilitude, right? I'm always about trying to create reality within the proscenium of our frame here. That's what I love the most. One of the many things I could not stand about Star Trek 09, there's an actual joke in the movie made when the ship's computer cannot understand Chekhov's accent. Now, why does that bother me? Because what that was doing, it was harking back to Walter Koenig's performance as Chekhov. It was reminding us that all of this is just a TV show, or now it's just a movie again. And what it did for me was it shattered the verisimilitude of what I'm watching. It also disrespected the character of Chekhov. It made the whole thing dumb. You're all supposed to, like, that joke was written for my mom. My mom's like, oh, I get it. You know, he's got, he's got a bad accent. To me, that just chipped away at any reality that movie was supposed to be creating. And, you know, one of my favorite line readings in the Kelvin verse is they're talking about how long Vulcan has left. And there's a moment, it's just a quick line, but Anton Yelchin, you can see that he's trying to grasp with the gravity of this planet is about to be, one of the founding members of the Federation is about to be destroyed. And he just says, minutes, sir, minutes. And his Anton Yelchin is actually Russian. He spoke fluent Russian, yet they saddled him with a goofier accent than he would normally have in order to to make that joke. And I'm like, that to me was everything wrong with modern Star Trek in a nutshell, because it wasn't so concerned with carrying forward the mythos. It was more concerned with appealing to the pop culture knowledge that most audiences had of these characters, rather than reestablish them as their own characters. The Kobayashi Maru sequence, which I won't get into, which is a complete bastardization in that movie of what was really going on in that scene. It's turned into a joke. It's played for laughs. And I get it. They tried to make a biff, bam, pow, woo, let's appeal to the lowest common denominator. Well, Star Trek never did that. Star Trek is not about the lowest common denominator. Now, I understand. Perhaps it is in terms of the audience, but that's never what Star Trek never punches down. It always punches up. Star Trek is a smart show, and it's about smart people doing smart things. And that's why it attracted the kind of audience that it attracted. And when you're trying to turn around and make it, we now have to appeal to the broadest possible audience, we have to make it like, we want it to be as big as Star Wars. Star Trek, at its purest form, is never going to be that. It's never going to be that. And if you're going to keep trying to change it into that, you're not going to have the enduring, lasting success that the original Star Trek had. That's why the reason Star Trek has endured for 50 years, for now 50 plus years, is because it was a show about really smart people doing really smart things. What Star Trek has been doing in the last 10 years is making itself less smart. In my mind, a misguided attempt to appeal to more people. As television has become smarter, as our entertainment has become smarter, whether it's Game of Thrones, whether it's Breaking Bad, a very sophisticated storytelling is going on. But what Star Trek has mistakenly done is it's taken, another thing about Star Trek is it's been inherently positive. It's always been optimistic. Now, even in the face of Deep Space Nine's Dominion War, the galaxy was at stake. Thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people were probably dying. But even in the face of that, our characters remained Star Trek characters. They remained characters that you could still admire. Even in an episode like In the Pale Moonlight, where Sisko has knowingly stood by and allowed a Romulan to be assassinated to bring the Romulans into the war, which is just about as dark and conflicting as Star Trek has ever gotten. There was still a light there. You still knew that Sisko was a good man. Well, Star Trek since Star Trek Discovery debuted, not so much. Not so much. I won't get into that. I'm not here to bash Star Trek Discovery. Not in this episode. So anyway, this article that was in Variety with Patrick Stewart was very interesting. It starts out, profiles him. He's 79 years old now. He talks about his one-man Christmas Carol show that I've actually seen, which is excellent. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend seeing it. It's pretty awesome. Now, it talks about it. He gets into his past, and he talks about his abusive upbringing. It's a really interesting, great article, and I think everybody should read it, and I'm going to post a link to this article in the live chat if you haven't already seen it. It talks about him starting up with Star Trek The Next Generation, and I would like to read this article. It also presaged an era in which speculative fiction would make for premium television. Game of Thrones, The Handmaid's Tale, Watchmen. The Next Generation was the first syndicated program nominated for Best Drama Series Emmy, an episode written by Morgan Gendel, The Inner Light, in which a probe seizes Picard's mind and causes him to experience an entire lifetime as a member of an alien society, became the first television episode in 25 years to win science fiction's top literary honor, the Hugo Award. Stewart describes himself as very proud of The Next Generation and, like other members of the cast, regrets that Paramount ended the show when it did, in a drive to take the Enterprise crew into theaters. But he found himself typecast afterwards. He recalls meeting with an unnamed major filmmaker who told him bluntly, "Why would I want Captain Picard in my movie?" Well, that guy's an idiot. Why wouldn't you? Stewart soon became the linchpin of another franchise, X-Men, playing Professor Charles Xavier. He continued to do major work on stage, and his feature and television roles alternated between those that leaned into his classical training and patriarchal image, Captain Ahab in an adaptation of Moby Dick for USA Network, a gay Manhattanite living through the height of the AIDS epidemic in Christopher Ashley's Jeffrey, and against it, a white supremacist leader in Jeremy Saulnier's Green Room, a pill-popping cable news jockey in Jonathan Ames and Seth MacFarlane Star's comedy Blunt Talk. It wasn't until his last X-Men exploit, starring in 2017 with Hugh Jackman in director James Mangold's Logan, that he imagined a return to Picard could be desirable. Now keep in mind, I would dare say perhaps Logan might be the best X-Men movie ever made. But, as we all know, I understand why Patrick Stewart is gravitating toward, well, the direction for Picard he gravitated toward after doing Logan. I think Star Trek Picard we don't need to look so much at the next generation as we do at his portrayal of Professor X in Logan to see where Picard's coming from. Hugh and I were thrilled when the last thing we did for X-Men was Logan, Patrick Stewart says. It was the best X-Men experience we both had because we were the same characters, but their world had been blown apart, he adds. Next Generation didn't end like that. In fact, our last movie, Nemesis, was pretty weak. Yes, but it was Picard's idea to go off-roading. It was Patrick Stewart's idea to go off-roading. Released in 2002, Nemesis lost money for Paramount. But J.J. Abrams' 2009 film reimagining Kirk and Spock, now played by Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto, cleared a path for CBS to revive the franchise for TV. Kurtzman and Brian Fuller's Star Trek Discovery, a prequel to the original series, would become the cornerstone of streaming service CBS All Access. Stewart had resisted past overtures from Star Trek curious producers. When he met in his kitchen with Kurtzman and writers Michael Chabon and Akiva Goldsman in 2017, he did so as a courtesy. I explained to them all those elements of Next Generation which belong in Next Generation and why I didn't want to go near them again, he says. But they talked about it in such an interesting way, and they talked for a long time. Stewart told the producers no thank you and sent them on their way. Then he had an immediate change of heart. He told his agent to ask Kurtzman to put ideas in writing. 48 hours later, Kurtzman sent over a more than 30-page packet outlining a possible Picard series. Picard finds its hero living in near isolation. Now listen to this carefully. Picard finds its hero living in near isolation on a very uncosmic French vineyard. He is retired and estranged from Starfleet, the interstellar navy to which he devoted most of his life. He's haunted by a pair of catastrophes, one personal, the other societal. The death of his android colleague, Lieutenant Commander Data, as seen in Nemesis, and a refugee crisis spawned by the destruction of the planet Romulus, as seen in Abrams' Star Trek. When those two seemingly disparate strands of his life cross, Picard returns to action, this time without the backing of a Starfleet whose moral center has shifted. Roddenberry believed that in the future human beings would advance to the point that they would essentially not have conflict with one another. Their biggest challenges would be external. Stewart, also an executive producer on Picard, insists we are remaining very faithful to Gene Roddenberry's notion of what the future might be like, but rigid adherence to that notion is clearly not what he's here for. In a way, the world of Next Generation had been too perfect and too protected, he says. It was the Enterprise. It was a safe world of respect and communication and care and sometimes fun. In Picard, the Federation, a union of planets bonded by shared democratic values, has taken an isolationist turn. The new show, Stewart says, was me responding to the world of Brexit and Trump and feeling, why hasn't the Federation changed? Why hasn't Starfleet changed? Maybe they're not as reliable and trustworthy as we all thought. Real-world parallels are not hard to identify. It is 1 week before the parliamentary election, and that will see the British Prime Minister and Brexit hardliner Boris Johnson's Conservatives win a staggering victory over their Labour rivals, and Stewart is not feeling optimistic about the near future. I'm not sure which one of us is in the most trouble, he says of Britain and the United States. I think it's actually the UK. I think we're fucked completely. Fucked. He points to studies predicting decades-long economic damage inflicted by the country's looming withdrawal from the European Union. Of the U.S., he says, there's a time limit to your fucked state, which is 4 years away. He expresses hope that the United States, as given us the Trump administration, can change, but adds he'll likely get reelected. These are not the opinions of someone who on the cusp of 80 is disengaging from the world. Next Generation alum Jonathan Frakes, who reprises his role as Commander William Riker in Picard and directed 2 episodes of the show's first season, believes that age has only heightened Stewart's powers. Patrick has become sillier as he's gotten older, Frakes says. His sense of humor is wild. His ability to be playful and more vulnerable makes him and his work more layered. He's 79 and he has a very full resume, so his confidence in his work allows him, I think, to be confident in his personal life. And he's at ease. It's a great ease to be with him. Anybody who's in the business as an actor could look to that career and say, that's a success. In the week ahead, Stewart will not only perform A Christmas Carol for the first time in more than a decade and a half, he'll also entertain Chabon and Goldsman at his home and hear their pitch for Picard Season 2. He says of Mangold, "I can't wait to work with James again." He expresses an enthusiasm for his recent turn in Elizabeth Banks' Charlie's Angels reboot, great tongue-in-cheek fun, that is undamaged by the photon torpedo hit the movie took at the box office. "I've been doing some really interesting work for the last few years," Stewart says. He thinks back to 1987 when The Next Generation premiered. "There was not a corner of my life, public, private, that wasn't touched by the sudden transformation. And I so enjoyed X-Men, Star Trek, and then having come back 18 months ago to do Picard, I've just..." He pauses and places a hand on the black binder. "God, this is going to be difficult to say. It's wonderful work, but it's not enough. The challenge is great, but I want something bigger." So that is the article that from Patrick Stewart, all about Patrick Stewart in Variety. I am posting a link in the live chat. I encourage everyone to read this article. Here's the thing. The people that know the least about why a franchise succeeds are the actors that are in that franchise. I know, Rob. What am I saying? Actors don't write the show. Actors usually don't conceive of the stories. Now, Star Trek actually has a long history of allowing the actors in the franchise to take over as creators. Famously, after they killed Spock, the only way Leonard Nimoy would come back, and this was a brilliant idea, was if they allowed him to direct. And Leonard Nimoy famously was allowed to direct Star Trek 3 and then Star Trek 4, and he had a big hand in coming up with the storyline for Star Trek 6. I think that one of the from a fan perspective and from a business perspective, while of course bringing Spock back to Star Trek 3 was, maybe it was a good thing, but allowing Leonard Nimoy to direct that film, I think, seriously hurt the Star Trek franchise because Star Trek 3 looks like it was made by a first-time director. Now, there's a lot of good stuff in it, but once you've done that with your franchise, you had Robert Wise, who was one of the great directors of all time. Now, you hamstrung him with a pushed schedule and visual effects that couldn't have been finished. And then you brought in Nicholas Meyer, who was a burgeoning filmmaker and writer in his own right. 7% Solution, he, of course, had made time after time, that he also wrote. He comes in, he rewrites Jack Soward's script at the 11th hour, and basically, for all intents and purposes, he was the writer-director of Star Trek II, even though he doesn't get credit in the film for writing the script. But anyway, whether you like Star Trek 3 or 4, I think Nimoy, obviously that's what he wanted to do, and he leveraged his position and he got to do it, which was great. Would Star Trek 3 have been a better movie if they had gone with, say, Harve Bennett's original conception of the story, which was much more serious, much more political? The Genesis device has caused a galactic controversy. It's mentioned by name in the currently existing Star Trek 3, but in the original script, Vulcan was up in arms over the revelation of this monstrous device. They wanted to secede from the Federation. A lot of good stuff was going on, and it was the Romulans who were in Star Trek 3, not the Klingons originally. And, of course, we get a Klingon bird of prey, which was supposed to be a Romulan bird of prey, but it's not like it's hard when I say that the actors, look, I love actors. You cannot make great television and great movies without actors. But actors, traditionally, their job is to come up and interpret text. And if actors work in the theater, the text in theater, more so than television or movies, is sacrosanct. You don't improvise in the theater. The word is the beginning and the end of theater. And all actors usually know that. Now, Patrick Stewart, I understand where he's coming from. All actors want great parts. And unfortunately, Next Generation, both for people like Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner, there were some chances to stretch, but for the most part, those were very constricting parts to play. Now, by the time you get to the feature films, of course, if you read Michael Pillar's book about the making of Insurrection, which was never officially released. I think you can buy it online. It's a very interesting book, and it talks a lot about Patrick Stewart's notes and input into the script. Now, I love Patrick Stewart. He wants to do something different. He wants to stretch. He's a classically trained Shakespearean Royal Shakespeare Company actor. And yet, being in a role like Captain Picard, I can imagine gets a little constraining after doing 178 episodes. You don't get to stretch a lot. So whenever he could stretch a lot, whether he was acting opposite David Warner in Chain of Command Part 2, or whether he was doing The Inner Light, he got to do something different where he wasn't just on the bridge saying, make it so. There were other times, episodes like The Drumhead, or in Yesterday's Enterprise, where he confronts Guinan. There's a lot of moments. I mean, Patrick Stewart is a phenomenal actor, and I get where he's coming from. However, I think, and what worries me, having not seen the Picard show, is once again, the Star Trek universe is being changed for, well, Patrick Stewart had a great experience on Logan. And social strife and darkness is a staple of the X-Men. I mean, when I was growing up, Chris Claremont's amazing X-Men graphic novel, God Loves, Man Kills, still one of the great X-Men stories of all time. The original Days of Future Past that saw all of the X-Men killed. The Dark Phoenix saga, Dark Phoenix, Jean Grey dying. It's not like misery was not something that wasn't part of the DNA of the X-Men franchise. One of the great things about the Logan film was it truly transcended the comic book genre. If you were watching Logan, if you were just a fan of science fiction or you were a fan of action adventure and you didn't understand, you could watch Logan and not know anything about the X-Men franchise and really get something out of it. But what is very interesting, it's much more interesting to play for an actor a role where they're consumed by darkness, where everything around them is not so good. Why play bright and shiny anymore? That's no fun. You want to play something that has a lot of emotional depth. Well, I think what's been very interesting about both Star Trek, as Star Trek has moved forward, it has really changed because the optimism that is inherent in Star Trek, part of that optimism is not just the characters, but it's the idea that humanity on Earth has been able to move forward, move past our petty differences. That the United Federation of Planets, despite the fact there's always some crazy admiral showing up with some cockamamie scheme, I get it. Somebody like John Gill, a historian, that decides, you know what, let's apply National Socialism to this stagnant culture and help it grow, not understanding that National Socialism, they need, a scapegoat. So their neighboring planet becomes somebody they can hate. So we've seen a lot of that. Star Trek has always been allegory. It's used the prism of a science fiction action adventure show to illuminate our lives today. How do the adventures of the crew of the Enterprise or the crew of Deep Space Nine or Voyager, how do they illuminate and maybe add some insight into what's going on in our lives today? So when I hear Patrick Stewart saying that, well, based on what's happening with Brexit, what if the United Federation of Planets became more isolationist and all that? That's fine. But is that Star Trek? That's him imposing what he thinks is interesting on the entire Star Trek universe. Now, I think that's great because that gives something for Patrick Stewart to play. But is that really good for the Star Trek franchise? I mean, I've always said that the best Star Trek never had villains. Star Trek has antagonists, and that is a different thing. There's a lot of I go back to a first season Star Trek episode that I love. And I think a lot of people will remember this episode, Arena, the Gorn, the green lizard monster. I've told this story before, I'll tell it again. When I first saw that episode, Gilbert, are you here to talk about Arena too? Do you want to talk about Arena? He likes Arena. Apparently, he knows that I'll give him a cookie. If you guys want to be able to have access to me while I'm online, you have to be a little bit more careful. Okay, boys and girls, that's what you get. So when I first saw the episode Arena when I was a little kid, now it's become something that people kind of laugh at and smile. William Shatner even did a commercial with the Gorn. But the idea of look, when I was growing up, the Gorn was amazing. I understand now the man in the suit, the idea that the limited production they were able to get away with, and the way the Gorn fights. I get that. But what is most important about that episode, and why I think it embodies the ethos of all Star Trek, is that at the end of that episode, where Kirk has taken the Gorn down with a cannon that he was able to fabricate, he is about to deliver a killing blow to the Gorn. No, Gilbert. Gilbert, no. Gilbert's. He's about to deliver a killing blow to the Gorn, and he stops himself. And he says, you know what? I don't know enough. Maybe you thought you were defending your territory. Maybe we were in the wrong. And he doesn't kill the Gorn. And the Metron shows up. And the Metron, the alien race that's been testing them, is like, after scanning your ship, we didn't know that you could show a quality of mercy. Maybe there's hope for you yet. And when I was a little kid, that was mind-blowing to me. Now, I think that was something that was unique to Star Trek, and it was unique at the time. On television, Gunsmoke, Bonanza were still the big deal. Now, I just wonder if the Federation is now corrupt, isolationist, whatever. The Romulans are exploiting the Borg. Brian Fuller pitched that. They apparently went with that. Because why not? Because there's 178 episodes of Star Trek, and how many Borg episodes? So we have to go with the Borg, because that is the easiest way to go. I get it. I understand. But I am hoping that Star Trek and Star Trek Picard is going to be good. But when I listen to what Patrick Stewart says, we just came out of, are we going to have more Last Jedi conversations about, I just don't believe, no matter what happens to Patrick Stewart's Captain Picard, I don't believe he's a broken man, especially after becoming Locutus. He already went home to his vineyard. He got over it. He got over being Locutus and being responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Starfleet officers. I mean, it wasn't his fault. But when I hear this, I think to myself, there's something fundamentally wrong where every new Star Trek story, whether it's going to be about Section 31, whether it's going to be about a Federation that's rotten to the core, or that there has been something that has been fundamentally removed from what Star Trek is. And that is this idea of positivity. The fact that human beings have gotten over these things, and that Earth was at the forefront of creating the United Federation of Planets, the Pink Skins, and that we begin our shows, as we've begun every Star Trek, well, for the last 10 years, 11 years now, with something that is inherently negative. And look, maybe the girl that needs help, the tropes, the very well-worn tropes that they're bringing with all of the incredible science fiction that's being written, and all of the future that is rapidly coming at us headlong, face first, we're going into the future. I would want Star Trek to do the same thing. And yet, they just can't seem to get away from these cliched action tropes, the darkness, whatever. I'd rather see something like, I hate to say it, I use an example of Her, the movie Her, all the time. When you think, it's going to turn into evil AIs or something, but it turns into something very different. I would like to see again, Patrick Stewart wants to bring in and turn Earth into the Brexit UK. That's fine. But is that what we want as Star Trek fans? I don't know, because I haven't seen it yet. I just think that the powers that be that are currently running Star Trek have been leading us down a path that is taking us further and further away from what Star Trek really made us feel. And what we're doing is we're getting rehashed storylines from other franchises or other places. In this case, we're going to see what Patrick Stewart loved playing as Professor X and Logan, which was terrific. We're going to see the Star Trek version of that. Is that a good thing? Don't know. Haven't seen it. Looking forward to it. I want it to be great, but I cannot help but think that we're going to be getting more of the same. In my mind, a wrong-headed approach to the Star Trek franchise. And I'm going to be reviewing the shows. I'll be talking about them. I want it to be good, people. I really, really want it to be good. Please be good, because nobody wants bad Star Trek. We've had too much of it. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I just thought it was interesting. Let's jump in to what you guys have to say. Willow sent a tip. She says, which non-superpowered race, i.e. not Q, the Dowd, etc., from Star Trek would you want to be? I would love to be a Romulan. I think Romulans, I mean, come on, you have the sensuality of the Vulcans. Romulans are the same race, just an offshoot. I think Romulans are cunning. The female Romulan commander, Dina Meyer, was a Romulan in Nemesis, like Hubba Hubba. Romulan redheads. I would want to be a Romulan. I would definitely be working for reform, but I'm a big Romulan fan. Muckbang Reviews sent in a super chat. Today's Prince song of the chat is officially When You Were Mine. When you were mine, I gave you all of my money, time after time. I'll stop. I love When You Were Mine. When You Were Mine is off of 1980's Dirty Mind album. That was Prince's, I want to say there was Prince, there was For You, Controversy, and Dirty Mind. I think Dirty Mind was Prince's 4th album? Hey, come on, you guys. I'm going to have to kick you out if you're going to bark like that, Tallulah. You can't, she's in here barking. You're not even barking at me. You're barking at nothing. You're barking at nothing. What if I throw you a cookie and will you stop barking, please? See, they know. Should I let them in here? Anyway, Muckbang Reviews also says, what did you make of TNG's Darmok episode 102? I liked it, but I found few others who like it. It's okay if you don't like it, but I would like your opinion. Okay, what's interesting about Darmok is, of course, they always talk about his arms wide, all of that. Darmok is an episode that stars Paul Winfield as Captain Dathon, and they are, come on, you guys, you got to leave me alone. See, this is why they've outlived their welcome here. That's why I sometimes have to change or close the garage door and not let them. I mean, if you want to stay in my lap, Tallulah, you're welcome to do that if you want. And don't drink my water. Come on, you got to get down. So anyway, in the episode, of course, Picard and Captain Dathon have to take on an entity that's on this planet. But the thing is, what's interesting about the episode is Captain Dathon's race communicates basically in metaphor. And so they have to figure out how can they talk to each other. Now, I think the ideas in the episode, I think, are much better than the actual episode itself. But again, it's a Picard-centric episode. Captain Dathon is a great alien. Paul Winfield's great. The makeup was great. Costuming was great. I think the episode is really interesting because it deals with communication. And in a way, if you look at Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, also dealt with how do we learn to talk to an alien race that has a much different way of communication than we do. Great science fiction concept. I actually really like Darmok. I think it's a fine episode, and it might not be as, say, delicious as an episode like Yesterday's Enterprise or something, but still, I think a very, very good episode. Moose Wizard sent in a super chat and says, if you could only have one hot toy, which one would it be? That's a really good question. Gosh, I probably wouldn't take any Marvel. Okay, there's probably two. The first one that jumped into my mind was the Christopher Reeve Superman, which you'll see when I get to 20,000 subscribers. The Christopher Reeve Superman, probably because that's kind of a standalone, iconic piece. The one thing about Hot Toys is they're like Lay's barbecue potato chips. No one can eat just one. You can't just have one. When you buy Hot Toys, you want to have more next to each other. And and setting them up. I mean, if you look, I just saw that Justin's Collection. One of my favorite YouTube channels is Justin's Collection. I don't know Justin, but I like Justin's Collection. Justin's Collection, he reviews mostly Hot Toys. I love his how he has them all displayed. He's got these great glass cases. I think he's in Australia, so he's able to get them free. I saw right before I went on, it popped up that he's reviewing the new Thanos. The armored Thanos from Endgame. I have the Infinity War Thanos, but there's also the armored Thanos from Endgame, which redoes the armored Thanos from Guardians of the Galaxy, which was too small. And I just am like, oh, because I wanted to do a display where you have both Thanoses with the Infinity Gauntlet and then that thing. So there's the two of them. Anyway, I'm getting off on. But if not Christopher Reeve, then I think the hot toy of Vito Corleone from The Godfather, because everyone knows I love The Godfather. So yeah, that's probably it. Mark C is here. Mark Chure says, if a computer has a universal translator, shouldn't it be able to pick up a Russian accent? Yes. Oh, and I didn't even finish that story, but the computer can't understand Chekhov. I don't know if I got that far, and I was just like, what? That is ridiculous. It's completely stupid. And yes, it should. You've got aliens on the ship, and you're telling me a computer, an AI that can't understand a Russian accent? It's just, I hated that. It was a dumb joke directed at the lowest common denominator, and I hate that. I hate lowest common denominator Star Trek. And you know what? Viewers hate lowest common denominator science fiction, fantasy, and horror. They're much smarter than that. And when you dumb things down that, as I'm spitting, I'm getting angry. I don't like it. I don't think anybody does. We live in an age of very smart programming. You know what? I'll tell you something else. While I thought the season 2 of Lost in Space was relatively hit and miss, I thought the first half, when they were planet bound, was better than the second half. But you know what's great about the Lost in Space TV show? And for the most part, also The Expanse. Those characters are a family. Star Trek is also inherently an ensemble show. Everyone loves Picard, and people might say that he outacted his fellow compatriots, with the possible exception of Brent Spiner. Maybe so. But Star Trek The Next Generation was an ensemble show that focused on different characters. You know, we had Deanna Troi, all the way back to the first season, always had episodes. Data had episodes. Geordi had episodes. There were always episodes. It's an ensemble show. Now, I get it. Patrick Stewart is he's a movie star now. I get where they're going, and we do bring back some of the cast. Maybe some of the cast we don't even know are coming back. But there is something inherent about Star Trek being an ensemble show. I think one of the things about Discovery is all of the other characters are sort of second fiddle characters. And it's interesting that Anson Mount was universally everyone's favorite character. He seemed to be the only actor and the only character written, or the only actor who understood what a Star Trek show actually is. Star Trek is all about a group of people working together for the greater good. That's what it is. Deep Space Nine arguably had the best ensemble. Even the original series, which was really Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, the Troika, you couldn't have that show. It couldn't have just been Kirk. Wouldn't have been as good of a show. So, anyway, yes, it should be able to pick up a Russian accent. Stubble McShave says, I think the new Star Trek movies and series are a cheap Coca-Cola knockoff type of drink that they've labeled as a Chardonnay. They produce simple stuff that they try to sell for the price of an exclusive wine. Stubble, that, my friend, is a great analogy. I feel the same way. I think Star Trek has been irrevocably dumbed down. I think the only way to save Star Trek is to give it... And again, maybe they're going to do this with Star Trek Picard. Maybe they are. I really hope so. But judging by how the science fiction concepts that we've seen in Star Trek Discovery and the way they've told the stories on that show, I don't have I don't have faith of the heart. I don't. We'll see, but I want it to be good. But yeah, they've dumbed Star Trek down. They've turned it into bargain basement science fiction that has no real understanding of what's really going on in terms of science. Their pseudoscience is terrible. Really, really, really bad. There's so many things I don't like about Star Trek Discovery, and I don't like with actually all of Star Trek since 2009. But I think the most egregious thing is that they've made it dumb. It's dumb. And we're getting such great writing across the board. Such great writing on so many different shows. Why is it that Star Trek, which should have the smartest writing on TV, really, especially when it comes to science fiction, fantasy, and horror? I mean, look at the ensemble cast of The Expanse. That's the way you tell Star Trek stories. I mean, I look at all the characters on The Expanse. I'm like, why aren't they on a starship? Well, that's because The Expanse is The Expanse. But yeah, I think the writing staff for Star Trek Discovery needs to sit down and read the great canonical works of literary science fiction, because not quite there. Journey's End says, do we know whether or not Picard is Prime Timeline or Kelvin Timeline? Could a bad twist be that this is the Kelvin version of Picard and Friends? Could very well be. I hate the fact that we're even asking that question. But then again, I don't understand why in the show they have Next Generation uniforms on. I don't like that. I look back and I go, wait, what? Okay, the comm badges are different, but we saw the evolution. Part of the fun of the Star Trek universe is to see how it's evolved. Look, when I was 12 years old seeing Star Trek the Motion Picture, I was really afraid. The Starship Enterprise was one of my favorite things in the world. I'd built countless models of it already. And when I saw it on screen, I mean, I'd seen pictures of it, but when I saw it on screen, it was so elegant and so beautifully designed. You know, the people that are approving the designs now of Star Trek, I'm like, where do you get that from? What design sensibility? And I know John Eaves is working on the show, but he's also doing what the producers tell them to do. And that's another thing. The designs of everything. I understand. Let's make the Klingons look alien. But the Klingons already had, I mean, there's been 2 classes of D7s in Discovery. They've retconned their own show over and over again because the people that are making Star Trek, have they even watched Star Trek? I don't know. I'm trying to stay positive. I'm just pointing things out. We've got so much great TV. Why is Star Trek so fucking bad? Why is it so bad? I mean, really? Why? Maybe Picard will be better. I hope it'll be better. You have a novelist working on it. Not exactly a novelist necessarily known for his science fiction. He's written some speculative fiction, yes, but okay. Prime Timeline. You know, I don't know. I don't know whether we know it's Prime Timeline or not. We do know this. We do know that, of course, the show is taken from what Kurtzman already did in both the previous Countdown comic that came out before Star Trek 09, and it's referring directly back to everything that happened in Star Trek 09. And, of course, the Borg. So everything that we know is coming out of events that precipitated the Kelvin timeline, which I think is also a little bit wrong. But anyway, who am I to say? Mukbang Review says, please say anything positive you can about Discovery. Yes, I'm messing with you, but yes, I'm serious. Well, what can I say that's positive about Discovery? It's hard for me because I think every choice from a production standpoint and a storytelling standpoint, I think is wrong-headed. There's very few things in Star Trek Discovery that I have anything positive to say. Well, I liked Anson Mount as Pike. I did. I liked Anson Mount as Pike. Go figure. A new character they bring on in a desperate attempt to try and make the show better. And I like that character. I like Pike. I thought his performance was good. Yeah. Mukbang Reviews says, have you ever faced or seen ageism in Hollywood? If so, please tell us. If not, that's great news. Well, I've been lucky in that I've sort of worked on the fringes of Hollywood. And I think what's really interesting, I'll tell you, I'm starting to see the exact opposite of ageism. I'm starting to see a pendulum swing back around because the knowledge that one needs to work in film, technical knowledge, understanding of the basics of how do you stage a scene, things like that. There, I think, are less and less young people that are that have that knowledge, and it's interesting. But yes, I'm seeing not so much ageism. I keep being told by friends of mine that they're losing jobs to younger, more diverse people. And that hasn't been working out very well because, look, I'm a meritocratist. I believe in the best people for the best jobs. Now, I understand that there's been a lot of people that haven't had the opportunities to get these jobs, and they definitely deserve to have those opportunities. I think when I say different voices, people that have had different backgrounds, they come from places that I don't come from. Those are the voices I want to listen to because I don't understand their experiences. I don't know where they came from or what they lived through or what they're about. And when I see people from different walks of life or different points of view tell stories, then we get really compelling narratives and things are better. I find that really, really, I find it much better. And it's only better that we have new voices. But that doesn't mean that those voices shouldn't know their craft. I don't want to see somebody, I don't want to see inferior product being made. I want to see great product being made. There's a little fruit fly around here who's bothering me, who's buzzing me. I don't know why. Mukbang Reviews also says, is there any way we can access your hot toys before 20K? If a big enough super chat, we can't all wait. You're going to have to wait, buddy. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun? I got to grow the channel and if you hit like and you share these chats, perhaps indeed, I will get there fast. And by the way, maybe I've got to do a little bit of organizing. I gotta build it all up. I've got hot toys that are in boxes. I'm gonna take out, put up a big display, the ultimate hot toys display that I've ever had. And I've got much older hot toys than a lot of people do. It'll be interesting. So Mukbang, I don't know. You got to help me. Daz New UK sent a super chat in. 101 are releasing Sign of the Times on Blu-ray in 2021. Well, what Darren is talking about is 101 Films out of the UK is releasing Sign of the Times. I own Sign of the Times on Blu-ray already. Sign of the Times was released in Japan in a beautiful box set. It's not in here, otherwise I would show it to you. But I already have obviously, for those of you who don't know, Prince made a Sign of the Times concert film. I had the Japanese Laserdisc I still do actually, the Japanese Laserdisc of Sign of the Times, and I have a Blu-ray of Sign of the Times. But I didn't know that 101 was releasing it. That's interesting. Mukbang says, thanks so much for your feedback on that episode of TNG. It's about communication. Makes sense. Brilliant response. Appreciated. Well, thank you. I'm not that brilliant, but that's one of the things. I mean, again, nowadays I don't even know if they would come up with an episode of Star Trek where let's write an episode like about communication. We'll use Darmok and we'll use The Arrival as examples. I mean, it's funny to me that there's so many interesting things they could draw upon to make Star Trek episodes about, and I don't see that happening. I mean, maybe the Borg, but even the Borg, when Maurice Hurley created the Borg and introduced them in the second season of TNG and Q Who, I mean, it was like, they're cyborgs, but we're going to make them evil. I mean, the Borg are one step up from $6 Million Man's fembots, or was that Bionic Woman? But anyway, fembots, I mean, it's not like the Borg were any great shakes. We'd seen the Cybermen. If you were Doctor Who fans, it was the quality of the Borg, which is so funny, that made them so memorable, is the fact that there was nobody you could reason with. They were like a swarm of locusts. When they show up, they assimilate your technology and leave you. They don't care about you, to the point of you can wander around their ship and they don't care about you. They don't see you as a threat. And it's frustrating that so much, once again, let's go back to the Borg. It's not like we didn't have, I mean, within the Next Generation, you had Q-Who, you had Best of Both Worlds 1 and 2, you had iBorg with Hugh, that they're bringing Hugh back, you had Descent Part 1 and 2. And then, of course, you in the movies had First Contact. I mean, and then Voyager played out the Borg, and there were some interesting elements that Voyager did with the Borg, but for the most part, all the Borg has been humanized. And it looks that we're going to see a lot more humanization of the Borg, their technology, experimenting on drones. And to me, the Borg were this really scary concept that have just been neutered. And it just smacks of, oh, we couldn't come up with something new? Let's go back to the Borg. Of course, because why? Why not? Let's do that. Let's go back to the Borg. Simon Gilmore says, I think you're my father. Well, Simon, I was a very promiscuous lad, so that's very possible. I wonder why you said that, though. Is that a flattering thing? Is your dad a good guy? I hope he is. If he is if I'd like to be flattered by that, but thank you. Claude Hibbert is here. Hail the great Watu. Brexit? Cinema, from Godfather to Metropolis, has been about class, culture, and power. The challenge is respectfully and accurately depicting those perspectives. Shakespeare is so woke. You're right. Absolutely. I totally agree. Class, culture, and power. I love that. But you're absolutely right. That's what a lot of great stories are about. But what I do like is I like that if I'm watching Star Trek, I'd like to think that somewhere out there is Earth, and that it's ultimately its humanity has been able to overcome its differences, and to hear that humanity has become more isolationist and that it's inspired by Brexit, I'm like, okay, once again, we're going to subvert the very basis, the very foundations of Star Trek to make it more relevant. The point is to boldly go and out there encounter different alien races. I mean, we're proceeding from the fact that Star Wars, why do I keep saying that? Because I'm thinking about Rise of Skywalker, that Star Trek is an elitist show. It's about the smartest and the best of us. And that Earth is full of smart and great people. And that's why we're moving out into the stars. And it was the whole idea, Camelot, the promise of Kennedy's Camelot, which was quickly subverted, but the dream was alive. And I think that was important. The Richard sent in a super chat and says, we have games and talks of the shows and films. I think what the Richard is saying, that everybody should go to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. There is a Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page that you can all go, and if you want to participate in these conversations, please go there. And as everybody knows, I'm going to get to letters. I got letters to read. I read letters on the show. If you're new, I've got a lot of new subscribers, which is a lot of fun to have. A lot of new people here. But if you want to participate, and you don't, look, I very much appreciate supporting the channel using the super chat feature and the tip feature to do this live. But if you want to send me letters, and for those new people here, if you go to the Burnettwork.net website, which is a big component of our channel, I do get letters there every day. And you know what? Since I brought it up, why not delve into a letter today? Because there's a couple of them, and I'm going to read one. And let's see if I can find a. This is a good one. This is from Jer. Jer Maninen. I wonder if I get his name right. Jer, all the way from Finland. What I love about our you guys are the best. The Post-Geek Singularity, you imagination connoisseurs out there, I swear to God, we have the best community on YouTube, bar none. And it's also one of the most worldwide communities, and God love you for it. So this letter comes from Finland, from Jer. Hi, Rob, and Happy New Year to you and my fellow imagination connoisseurs. As it is the new year, I wanted to write to you about something we all forget at times, but which is good to remind everyone, and that is that anything is possible, and that we shouldn't let negative things around us affect our possibilities, unless Star Trek Picard's bad. No, I'm just kidding. I will start with this. I will start this with a short story I once heard by Les Brown, which I think is great. Two young boys were skating on ice when all of a sudden one of them fell through and got trapped under. His friend started to punch the ice in hopes of breaking it, but could not get through. In desperation, the friend climbed a tree and broke off a huge branch. He came back down the tree and started smashing the ice, eventually breaking it and miraculously saving his friend. As emergency services came after the boy was safe, they sat in amazement and wondered how the little boy was able to break off the branch, smash the ice, and save his friend. As they were sharing their amazement, an old man walked up and said, "The boy was able to do it because there was no one here that told him he couldn't." I love that. I love that story. That's great. I think too often in life we allow people around us to make achieving things we want seem impossible. More so in today's environment where our mobile phones are constantly blasting us with new information. One might think that it would allow us to see more success stories, but the unfortunate reality is that for every success news out there, there are 10 news detailing how people are failing. So these stories get drowned out too easily, so most people won't even notice them. The same logic can be applied to every other situation. For example, Star Wars. Rian Johnson with The Last Jedi got such a negative response from many people that most likely killed any chance for any future Star Wars movies to be made by him, which I think is sad because if I look what Rian did after that, Knives Out was a great film. And some people probably didn't even go see it because of the feedback from The Last Jedi. I think if we as a people would have given Rian praise for all new things he had encouraged to try out in The Last Jedi and giving him opportunity to try again, who knows, given more freedom, he might have made the Star Wars Knives Out movie. I'm not saying we shouldn't give creative feedback. We should. But too often we let the negative side drown out the positive, to focus on giving encouragement for the next try instead of hate. When considering people out there who failed but didn't give up on their dreams, J.K. Rowling got loads of rejection from her Harry Potter books, and today her books have been sold over 450 million, have sold over 450 million copies. Same for Walt Disney. In 1919, he was fired from his first animation job because he lacked imagination and good ideas. Who knows? If Walt Disney had been surrounded by people who all told him he couldn't ever make anything out for himself, would the MCU, as it is today, be there if there was no Disney Corporation? Would we even have new Star Wars movies if Disney hadn't bought Lucasfilm? I can write much more on the subject, but I will leave that for future letters. I just want to say this. Any one of you might be the next Walt Disney, Steven Spielberg, or Gene Roddenberry, but you lack the courage to go after your dreams because you think it's impossible or you are afraid. My advice to everyone is dream it, believe it, do it. And nothing is impossible. See? I didn't even know that I was going to read this letter. This is the kind of thinking that I'm getting from many members of this community. And I think that is incredible. It's, you know, I do believe anything is possible. Now, here's the thing. You can't just decide you want to do something and then have it happen. It could be a lifelong, it's a lifelong journey. It's a lifelong avocation. Something very interesting happened yesterday in the life of the movie that I've been working on, as you all have heard. Probably tired of hearing about it, but Tango Shalom. I can't talk about what it is, but it's very interesting. And if it were to happen, it would be a victory, a long time coming in the life, the kind of victory that films seldom get, but especially indie films. And it would be great if it happened. I don't know if it will. It's a long shot. It's, I don't think the odds are in its favor, but it could happen. And I think it could happen because we put in many years and a lot of long hours in order to get it into a position or get it into shape of where it was going to happen. So, I think what's really important in life, the most important thing in life, is to figure out what it is that you want and to understand and know that you have the ability to go out and get it. I might have wanted, my dream might have been to play in the NBA. I would have to understand that dream, no matter how hard, I did play basketball growing up, by the way, and I was not as into it. One of my friends that I grew up with who lived in my neighborhood, Quinn Snyder, is the head coach of the Utah Jazz and is going to sign a contract extension. Quinn Snyder lived and breathed basketball even in elementary school. We played together on boys club teams. And it is incredible to see him achieve his goal. He went to Duke. He played for Duke. He worked his way up, and now he's the head coach of an NBA team. And how great is that? Kid in my neighborhood. Kid I went to school with. By the way, one of the nicest guys. He was one of the nicest people that I grew up with. And to see him have such success is amazing. Now, you can't fulfill every dream. But if you can isolate or you can recognize what it is that you have the ability to go out and get based on your skill set, I think you should pursue it. And to speak to that, one of my favorite, I've said this before, but one of my favorite pieces of advice was in a Dear Abby column. For those of you who don't know, Dear Abby and her sister wrote advice columns that were syndicated all over the United States, if not the world. And I'll never forget, one of my favorite Dear Abby letters of all time was, Dear Abby, she got a letter from a woman who said she's always wanted to be a doctor, but she was 42 years old. And if she went and she was going to go through medical school and her residency, by the time she was actually a doctor, she was going to be 50. Well, Dear Abby's advice was, you're going to be 50 anyway. We live in a world now where I don't think, somebody asked about ageism earlier. Clint Eastwood's going to be 90 in May. He just had Richard Jewell come out, which people said, I haven't seen it, but said it's one of his best films. This world is, I've never believed that you should stop. I mean, look, I probably should have given up. Look where I'm sitting. Look at this room that I'm sitting in. And this room surrounds us. It's full. It's chock-a-block full of stuff that I've been interested in since my childhood. Now, am I the richest man in the world? Am I the richest man in the world? No. Do I have to work my ass off every single day? Yes. But here's the thing. I'm still having a good time, and they're still making all this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of great things in the world. And I could, if I started reading a lot of these books again, I wouldn't, the rest of the time I have left on this planet, I wouldn't finish everything that's in this room. And I think that it is a lifestyle choice, not to be some Tony Robbins guru, but I made a choice to leave Seattle, leave my home state, and I never looked back. I moved down here 2 weeks after my 21st birthday, and I came down here. Nobody came with me. I had all my stuff that I owned. Yes, my entire comic collection. I had a Toyota Celica. I put a trailer hitch on it. I rented a U-Haul, put everything I owned in it, and moved down here. I'd never even lived outside of, I lived in the same bedroom my whole life until I was 21 years old. I mean, I was in college, so from 18 to 21, I didn't live at home except during the summer where I worked. But I just picked up all my shit and moved. I never thought I wasn't going to succeed. I'm like, I want to work in the movie business. That's what I always wanted to do. And from the time I was 13 years old, working at video stores and working around adults, you had to hone a lot of different skills in order to effectively work in the motion picture business. But it was something that I wanted to do. And I think anybody who wants to do something, and remember, it's not just a skill. You have to learn, I call it three-dimensionality. You have to be a three-dimensional person. You have to know how to comport yourself public-wise, oh my brothers, as Alex DeLarge said. There's a lot of work that goes on, especially when you're on a movie set. You're dealing with, as I said, a movie set is a microcosm of society. You've got white-collar workers, you've got blue-collar workers, you've got crafts people, you've got artists. It's great. That's why I love working on movie sets. And when you're watching people work on movie sets, there's no more inspiring place to be when everybody's fighting to make that 12 hours and make their days. It's a great place. It's awesome. Let's see. That was a great letter, Jared. Thanks for writing that in. Here's another one. Douglas Root, who you've seen on the show. Douglas Root sent in a video. Douglas Root in Brooklyn. Douglas Root writes, Happy New Year, Rob. First off, thanks for indulging me and showing my holiday video that my girlfriend Paula helped me make. Even thought it was kind of embarrassing, and I'm clearly not a morning person. We both get a kick out of it. Also, I love the new set. It looks great. This year, we will be getting our final film installment of Daniel Craig's James Bond, which had me thinking of my lifelong connection to Bond films. My dad was a huge Bond fan. While my mother was in labor with me, he started and finished reading You Only Live Twice. How cool. What a great book to read in terms of when you were about to come into the world. So he was really living twice. I'm not too sure if my mom had a long labor or my dad was just a very fast reader. Needless to say, Bond was a big part of my life from the day I was born. Now, to understand this story, you have to understand my dad and his connection to Bond. My dad was an electrical engineer for Con Edison here in New York City for over 35 years. But before that, he served in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. Since his draft number was about to be called up, he decided to enlist. After boot camp, Dad was placed in the Signal Corps, whose mission was to establish and maintain communications for the U.S. Army, and hopefully in doing so to save lives of soldiers in combat. His particular assignments were to establish communications between the front line and rear command. This meant that he would be embedded with the frontline infantry troops. Yeesh. During his service, my dad saw and experienced all sorts of combat. He was a certified marksman, even went on night missions. He even told me stories of engaging in hand-to-hand combat. He was from a man's man, self-reliant, living on the edge and trying to stay alive one day at a time. My dad sometimes described his service days as being analogous, with a bit of exaggeration, to James Bond, sneaking around as setting up communications links, being resourceful, and going it alone at times to get a mission done. I believe the first Bond novels were written around 1953, corresponding to when he left the service. In some ways, he fancied himself as a James Bond character, going into impossible missions with just your wits and grits to survive. So, as a kid, starting with Diamonds Are Forever, my dad would take me to each new Bond movie. His favorite Bond was always Sean Connery. He didn't dislike Roger Moore, but he felt Moore lacked the physicality of Connery. As the Bond films progressed through the 70s and into the 80s, my dad's irritation with the franchise grew more and more. Then it hit its peak. He was absolutely apoplectic after seeing Pierce Brosnan in The World Is Not Enough and then in Die Another Day. He had had enough. With nothing personally against Brosnan, my dad loved the novels, but as the movies moved beyond Fleming's source material, he felt that Bond morphed into a silly character with even more sillier gadgets. An invisible car, for God's sake. Brosnan's Bond missed the mark on the Fleming version, which portrayed Bond as a sly guy using his wits and resources to solve problems, not engaging in outlandish gizmos to get him out of absurd predicaments. Brosnan was campy and way too smooth. Dad was never a fan of the 90s Bond movies. In 2003, we went to see our Daniel Craig's first Bond film. That would actually have to be 2006. I don't mean to be that guy, but I got to be that guy. In 2006, we went to see Daniel Craig's first Bond film. Even more importantly, and for the first time, my son, Dylan, age 7, came with us. It was his first time seeing a Bond film in the theater. How cool was this? Me, my dad, and his grandson, 3 generations, all together sitting in a theater for a new James Bond movie. Craig's iteration was gritty, brash, a young maverick making his mark as a new 00 agent for MI6. Dad approved of this version. We all did. However, Craig wouldn't escape his critique after seeing Quantum of Solace. He said, "What the fuck happened there?" He felt Bond acted confused, sophomoric, was a hybrid of Indiana Jones and Tom Cruise. Well, Dad did have a point. Yes, he did, although I'm a Quantum of Solace apologist. Sadly, that would be the last time all 3 of us would see a Bond film together again. My dad, 77, passed away a year before Skyfall opened. However, I'm sure he would have agreed with you, Rob, that Skyfall was a low mark for Bond, a failed hero, a disappointing version of our family's favorite action star. For me, Spectre was the lowest point of Craig's Bond films. It was unremarkable. However, I did appreciate Craig's acting, and I felt he delivered a solid performance. Dylan and I are hoping to get a great Bond film this year. This April, we plan to buy an extra seat next to us in memory of Dad. Oh, that's really cool. I love that idea. I've never done that before. I've never bought a ticket to a movie for somebody that wasn't there, that couldn't go. Maybe I'll do that for when I go see Black Widow. You know what? I'm going to buy an extra seat when I go see Eternals, because John Schnepp would have loved Eternals. I'm going to do that. In April, we plan to buy an extra seat next to us in memory of Dad and hope the movie won't let us down and show a Bond who is truly cunning, resourceful, self-reliant, and courageous like my dad was when running a communication line to save the lives of his fellow brothers on the front lines. Yours in freedom, Douglas R. Douglas Root. Well, Douglas, you know what I got to do? For those of you who might not have been here, allow me to do this. Allow me to go and let me go into my little media library. And one of the fun things about this cool software, watch, I'll screw up my entire, I'll screw up my entire scene. But let me see if I can, if I can find this as I'm looking. I think this is the right one. We shall see. No, that's not the right one. But I'll try again. Because now I'm, wait, maybe this is it. Hang on. Uh-oh. We'll see. I know it's taking me a long time now. You'll be like, wait, what? What are you doing? That wasn't it either. You know, maybe I'll come back to it. Douglas. Or maybe I'll come back tomorrow. I was going to show you the video Douglas sent me, and apparently I'm not as sly on the fly as I thought I was. But, you know, I'm learning. I'm getting better. I'm getting better all the time, as the Beatles said. But what a great letter. I love letters like that. Thank you so much. Wow, there's a lot of you in here. Avenue Pad sent in a super chat. Star Trek 3 kind of proved they could have had a show without Spock, though Spock was definitely there in that movie in spirit. Underrated movie. Well, you know, I agree with you. I mean, as I'm loath to say this, because I know I'm going to get a lot of criticism. Losing Leonard Nimoy was a huge blow, but also it would have been interesting to see Star Trek 3 prove that the characters could carry on. But you could have added new characters because it was a movie series and gone where no Star Trek character or no Star Trek had gone before. I mean, of course, it was nice that they brought him back. And I have to say, look, when I saw Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, I've told this story before, but I was in college. I was at the Evergreen State College. And if you had a problem, you could go get an emergency loan for up to $300. And I have to say it was abused by some people I know. I abused it. I went and got an emergency loan, and my great friend Taylor White had screening tickets to go see Star Trek IV, an early screening at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Samuel Goldwyn Theater on Wilshire Boulevard here in L.A. So I was like, oh, my God. So I went and got an emergency loan. I got myself a plane ticket. I paid it back, though. I did pay it back. But I got a plane ticket. I flew to L.A. right before Thanksgiving, and I saw Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home at the Academy Theater, and it was glorious. I mean, that theater was great. But I didn't like Star Trek IV very much when I first saw it. I thought it was a little pedestrian. I thought ILM certainly gave us the B team doing the visual effects, if not the C team. But I've come to enjoy that movie more because, you know, I expected more. My problem was after Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek II, I felt that the Star Trek film franchise became very constricted. It was made, of course, by Harv Bennett, produced by Harv Bennett, but it just became small-minded. I wanted to see scope, and I wanted it to be intellectual. I wanted it to be more like the series, but it also became very much for the masses. But there are things in Star Trek 4 now that I really like. Like I love a lot of the funny interplay. You know, what does it mean, exact change? Weren't those a gift from Dr. McCoy? They will be again. That's the beauty of it. I mean, that's stuff which I didn't like at first, I've come to enjoy. But anyway, you're right. Star Trek 3, I don't think is underrated, but the spirit of Spock is definitely in that whole movie. And it's really too bad they didn't shoot Harv Bennett's original story treatment for that movie, because it was far more sophisticated and far more interesting, far more adult. I just think that, you know, I don't think Leonard Nimoy was getting his space legs, so to speak, to direct. So, Journey's End said, "Did you watch Red Letter Media's commentary on Star Trek? I'd love to see you on a panel discussion with Mike and Rich about the state of modern Trek." Okay. For those of you who don't know Red Letter Media, why you should, I first discovered Mike. It was their Generations review. Before Red Letter Media did their epic prequel reviews, the first things I discovered by them was their Generations review, and then the 4 reviews they did of the Next Generation movies. And that was the first time I think, I don't know if Plinkett I can't remember. Maybe Plinkett was doing those reviews too. I thought his review of Generations was the greatest thing I'd seen on the internet. I mean, I really did. Those reviews were great. I loved them. They were so good. And then the prequel reviews. I honestly believe, despite the fact that there's a lot of that Mr. Plinkett stuff in the prequel reviews, those reviews are almost like a masterclass in what was wrong with those movies. And I think I would show them to any students if I was teaching a class. Like I've spoken a lot in colleges. I've lectured. I would love to teach a class. I would love to teach a college course on storytelling and utilize things like that. But I would as a point counterpoint, I would show Star Wars and the Force Awakens to show what works and what doesn't, how one works and one doesn't work at all. But I would use the films themselves. I wouldn't use my commentary as much as I would point out things and use the films as examples. But I've always wanted to teach a college course on storytelling. I never have. But love Red Letter Media. I highly recommend delving into Red Letter Media's old reviews of the Star Trek films and the prequels. I just hope that it's really hard, I think, to not become sort of jaded and negative in this YouTube space at some point, especially lately. I mean, it seems like that's why I still want everybody to understand that I really want Picard to be surprising. I want it to be good. Look, I went into Watchmen primed to hate it, and I found there's some pretty great television in it. I thought ultimately it was sort of muddled as I got to the end of it, but there is some great TV. And episode 6 was marvelous, and I thought that it was better than I thought. I was surprised. It was something Damon Lindelof made that I didn't wind up hating, which is, I don't know what that says about me, or maybe it says something about him. It's not his job to make me like what he's putting out. He's much richer and more successful than me, so he wins. But I do want his stuff to be better. Mukbang Reviews is also here and says, I know we've talked Collide to death. I know we've talked Collider to death, but will you view or review John's show tomorrow? What Mukbang is referring to is John is going to have Mark Fernandez, who bought Collider a couple of years ago, on his show to talk about the Collider debacle. What's happened there? I watched Mark Fernandez's town meeting, and I thought it was pretty much a train wreck. I really did, and it was just mixed messages. First of all, I like Mark Fernandez. I really liked my time with Collider, and I liked everybody that I worked with. The way that I was pushed out of Collider at the behest of somebody that wasn't at all a part of Collider for dubious reasons. And I'm going to leave it at that. And I'm going to say that I was in a position, a lose-lose position. There was nothing I could do. It was a fight I couldn't win, and it was a fight I should never have even fought, which I didn't. So I chose to go away quietly into the night. And I don't blame anyone there. However, it was very disappointing that Mark Fernandez did not stick up more for me because I deserved it. And I understand they were also put in an impossible situation. There was nothing they could do. It was a bad situation all the way around. That said, I like Mark Fernandez, and I like everybody at Collider. I thought what happened at Collider was extremely unfortunate. It was something that was charting. You could see it happening. Those shows, the voices. The problem with Collider was once Mark Fernandez took over, there was no real direction. This YouTube space is a very fickle mistress, and it changes on a daily basis. Can't plan anything. You can just try and do your best. Look, since Collider, since in the last week, I now am competing with former compatriots. I was on Heroes with Coy Jandrew. He's out there on YouTube doing live broadcasts. Roxy Stryer started her show. John Roca started his show. I like all three of those people. But now they're competing. They're directly competing with me in the same space. And that's fine. You know, I've never shunned competition. I'm doing my own thing. I have my own thing going, which is great. But I like all of those people, and we live in a very interesting place where you can have a voice, where anybody can turn on their webcam and start broadcasting to the world, and I think it's great. I would like to see our movie pundit space remain strong and upbeat and supportive, because I find there are no YouTubers that I would actively go after and take down, because the very idea of getting on here and putting yourself out there is terrifying in the first place. And I really respect most of the people, even people that I disagree with. You know, they're still out there. I might disagree with somebody, but that's what America is. That's what free speech is. And I don't have to watch them. I don't have to put up with them. You know, but I also can watch someone like Dave Rubin, who I think was unfairly branded. I know he left the Young Turks, and there's a lot of people that don't like Dave Rubin's show. I like Dave Rubin's show. I like deep dive conversations. And I also like Joe Rogan a lot. I learn a lot. I love hearing deep dive conversations with people. Somebody actually reached out to me. One of my heroes, as a matter of fact, reached out to me the other day about coming on maybe this show. I'd love to have this person on this show, maybe John's show. I couldn't believe it. Really one of my heroes. And contacted me directly. And I've been on shows with this person before, but it was like, oh my God. Anyway, it was very exciting. So, look, I want everybody at Collider to do well and everything. So, yeah. The Richard says, sorry, mate, you missed my first super chat. You mean about talking about, oh, did I? Oh, you know what? I did miss your first super chat, and I apologize for that. The Richard says, I'm happy to be a mod for your Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, hoping folks will stop by and join and see what magic we have going on. Well, the Richard is correct. On the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, there's all kinds of good stuff going on, and the Richard is posting there all the time. The Richard has great artwork that he's done. He's a great member of the community, so check it out. Go to Facebook and check out the Post-Geek Singularity page. It's great, and I love how active people are on it. So Richard, I'm sorry I missed that. Jay DeHall says, my first super chat, your internet sucked you in you wait, my first super chat, your internet sucked in your my first super chat, your internet sucked in your last stream. Sign up for business class internet. They don't throttle and guarantee speeds. Happy New Year's. I have to say, I thought I knew what was going on. Apparently, I don't know if it's a YouTube issue. It's on the YouTube side, whatever is going on. But yes, yesterday I was trying to connect at full HD. For whatever reason, and I've tried many different things, YouTube seems to be limiting me to 720p. And maybe it's because I don't have as many subscribers as I should. As I get more subscribers and the channel gets bigger, maybe, there the dogs go. Maybe I will have an easier time coming on at full HD, which is maddening. It is very maddening. Hey, you guys, what are you barking at? Tallulah, wow, it's always something going on here. Mukbang is back. Mukbang says, even outside of Hollywood or movies, your advice is relevant and useful to us all. Well, that's good to hear. That's very nice of you. Thank you for speaking so effectively about hard work. Well, look, we live in this world where I see a lot of this here's one of there are a lot of good things about the modern age. Technology being first and foremost one of the great ones. We're carrying around supercomputers, and we're carrying around amazing video cameras that can shoot in 4K in our pockets. You know, we've got YouTube, this platform where you can broadcast globally across the planet to anybody who has a connection. But because of that, the democratization of these voices, which I think is tremendous, has not necessarily translated over to people understanding the correct ways to do things, like learning how time code works when you're creating movies and television. And that there are fundamentals. Just like if you want to be a writer, I mean, heck, you can write on the internet, you can get your writing out there, but that doesn't necessarily make you a good writer. You know, everybody should have their strunk and white, their elements of style right there next to them. If you want to write, you got to have the elements of style. There's probably an online version of it too. The Elements of Style is a book about writing. I don't know if they have the Elements of Style. I mean, maybe it's in every language. I've only read it, I mean, obviously, because I read English. But I got that book when I was in school, and it's served me well. I don't have it right within my hands here, but, you know, I think writing is something, it can take a lifetime to master. But there are ways to do it correctly, just like there are ways to edit correctly. One of the interesting things about YouTube is I've seen jump cutting, people talking to you, jump cutting the way like Jeremy Johns cuts his show, or the way that let's just jump right into it. That guy who I love, and why am I drawing a blank on his name? I love that guy. His name's on the tip of my tongue. But that editing style sort of became, it was more of a YouTube thing. I call it the Max Headroom style. Max Headroom shows how old I am. But that was sort of a new function, a new editorial style that became popular, that's used by a lot of YouTubers. I don't cut things that way when I do my shows, but it's interesting. And I do think that the fundamentals are something to be used. And yeah, nothing comes easy. Even though we live in this Instagram immediate world where everybody thinks things are gonna fall on them. I mean, anyone who works in Hollywood will tell you. That's why when I hear it, it's interesting. Like, I love Gary Beekler. I was watching Nerdrotic. I was watching his Nerdrotic channel. He was doing a live stream, and here he was talking about the Hollywood elite getting roasted by Ricky Gervais. But here's the thing. Here's something that I have found very true in my experience working in Hollywood today. Most of the people that I've met and who are currently working and still working, who have had longevity in this business, were not born Hollywood elites. The people that are filmmakers, the actors, they are people that work their way. They've stuck it out in this business. I mean, there's a lot of people I know that I work with that quit. You know, I've been working here. I've been working in Hollywood since I was 22 years old. Started out as a PA on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. Now I'm still eking out. Every day is a struggle. I'm eking out. I've had certain great commercial successes, but I am not living an upper middle class life the way a lot of my friends I know are, because I chose this. I chose to do this life. I mean, Elizabeth, who's a great fine artist, has always wanted to teach art herself. She does paintings and commissions, but she just got into Pasadena's Arts Center. And I won't say exactly how old she is, because she wouldn't like that, but she's going to be going to school with a bunch of 20-year-olds, 18, 19, 20-year-old artists, and she's twice some of their ages. Now, she got in, she got a scholarship based on her portfolio. It's not like she's like, nah, I'm not going to do that. Because we live in a world now where there's so much information and there's so much access if you want it. You know, you can go out there and make anything happen for yourself. Now, it's hard. It's hard. You have to commit to it. And, you know, I've heard the best advice I ever heard. It took 10 years to become an overnight success in Hollywood. And I think that's true of anything. But what's great is what we have available to us. I mean, look, I can't believe this is the 313th episode of this show. But, you know, people keep coming back. I've got this great audience, and you have to work. You know, doing YouTube shows, if I'm not working on something else, I'll come and do this show. And there's been times like, I don't know what I'm going to say. I can't believe that somebody's doing yard work next door. I can't believe that I'm sometimes still doing this. I mean, I didn't know today. I'm like, there hasn't been a lot of news. There hasn't been a lot of topics to talk about. And then, boom, Patrick Stewart pokes up. Variety cover story this week. Patrick Stewart talked about Star Trek Picard, and he's like, yes, I think the Federation should be like Brexit. And I'm like, I know what I'm going to talk about. But I appreciate you saying so. I'm a firm believer. You know, Rocky Horror Picture Show, don't dream it, be it. Absolutely. Except, oh, wait. Echo Base Network sends in a super chat and says, pushed our release date back to the 18th of January. If you're free, we'd love to have you on that night at the same time as Doomcock and Nerdrotic. Are you asking me to be on a show at the same time with Doomcock and Nerdrotic? Count me in, Echo Base Network. Echo 3 to Echo 7. Honnold, buddy, do you read me? There isn't enough life on this. Never mind, I won't get into it. Count me in, sir. I would be honored. With Gary and Nerdrotic, that would be fine. You know, I hope they're okay with having me on, too. I would hope so. Dan V900 says, it turns out that the news about a High Republic movie is from being mentioned in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic. Star Wars News Net hasn't mentioned the connection when it would have early access. You know, I never believed in that. I don't know. I mean, maybe. I wouldn't say anything about that. We'll wait and see. The High Republic era. I don't know. Ashley Short tipped me. Thank you, Ashley. Hi, Rob. Really enjoying the hype build for No Time to Die. Me too. What is your favorite pre-opening credits Bond scene? Even though I found Spectre rather dull, I loved witnessing Bond Unchained and wrecking shop in Mexico City. Thanks, Rob, for all that you do. First of all, Ashley Short, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. For all of Spectre's faults, and there are many of them, I thought the opening scene in Mexico City was amazing. It's clearly one of my favorite opening Bond scenes. Beautifully done, unbelievably, impeccably staged. It starts with these long sweeping camera shots. It is awesome. It is awesome. Definitely one of the best Bond opening title sequences. Octopussy, the Acrojet sequence. Great opening title sequence. I love For Your Eyes Only, where we have Blofeld. Shh, can't say it's Blofeld, but shh, it's Blofeld. The helicopter scene. I know that they played out another helicopter scene in Spectre, but the helicopter scene in For Your Eyes Only is terrific. Great combination of practical effects and model work. Amazing. Spy Who Loved Me, the ski jump sequence. I love The Spy Who Loved Me. Let's see. What else? What other sequences did I love? You know, I loved GoldenEye. The introduction of Pierce Brosnan with infiltrating that whole dam. I like that. Tomorrow Never Dies. The terrorist arms bazaar. I should probably tell you opening sequences I don't like, but I'm trying to think of, are there? I think for the most part, Bond has pretty good opening time. I loved Casino Royale. Made you feel it, did he? I mean, it was great. I'm a huge fan. I did not like, I'll tell you what I did not like. I did not like Skyfall because Bond fails. I thought that was lame. That movie makes me cringe a lot of the time. But yes. The Richard says, R.A. still talks highly of you. He comes to hang out with my family for barbecue. Awesome how things work out. The Richard is talking about R.A. Mihailoff, who played Leatherface on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, the first movie I ever worked on. It's really interesting that it's funny that to know R.A. and also Dave Scow, who wrote Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, that I worked on in 1989. Then in 2008, I got Dave Scow hired on to rewrite The Hills Run Red, which is a horror movie that I produced in Bulgaria. Uh-oh. There's landscapers next door. There be landscapers here. You know, you just never know what's going to happen. Hope it's not too bad. But yeah, it's always fun to work with people and work with them again. Dan V900 sent another super chat in saying, I meant Star Wars Newsnet would have early access to the comic for a possible review, so I didn't buy the news originally and believe it less now. You know what, Dan? You're probably right about that. I could definitely see that being the case. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to read. I've got another letter, because why shouldn't I have another letter? Because letters are good. Well, here's another one. Oh, am I going to open I'm going to open a kettle of fish with this one. Tony Martinson's here. Tony Martinson, longtime imagination connoisseur, sends in this letter. One thing that a lot of people are disappointed by with the sequel trilogy is that we never got to see the iconic trio together again. That's what I've been saying. Huge mistake. And while I agree it's a bit sad, the idea itself to not have them all together isn't necessarily a problem. For me, the problem came with what they did with it. I am not a fan of J.J. Abrams as a writer nor as a director. I think as a director, he is a competent studio hire that gets the job done, but he lacks an identity of his own. Very astute. I think his movies lack a soul because they're afraid of challenging their intended audience. He always plays it safe and rushes through things. J.J. Abrams is a credited co-writer of The Force Awakens, and that to me is one of the reasons I've always been puzzled by his decision to not have the original trilogy characters together, since that seemed to be a safe bet. All of us wanted to see these characters together again. So why didn't JJ, who always tries too hard to please the audience, do that? The question has puzzled me. And just a few days ago, in a discussion about that very topic, something suddenly clicked for me, and I have a theory. Fans of The Force Awakens usually defend Abrams' decision to not have them reunite as being a ballsy move. But I'm going to make an argument that it was actually Abrams playing it safe. Keep in mind, this is just me speculating, of course. I can't claim that I know what was going on in Abrams' mind. Think about how the characters were presented in The Force Awakens. Leia didn't get much to do and didn't get a lot of development from when we last saw her. Even her Force abilities in The Force wasn't different from what we saw in Return of the Jedi when she sensed Luke was okay. Han Solo had basically regressed into being the dishonest smuggler we all fell in love with in A New Hope. He, of course, was killed off because Harrison Ford probably wouldn't even agree to come back if he wasn't. Despite Han Solo, unlike Leia and Luke being quite heavily featured in the plot, he hadn't developed as a character in the 30 years since we last saw him. Luke wasn't even in the movie, basically. He was on screen for a few seconds and didn't even have a single line of dialogue, but the way he looked was reminiscent of Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope. He looked like a wise Jedi Master, which all of us fans expected him to be. So while The Force Awakens did feature the original trio, the movie didn't do much with them. And as I said before, some fans think Abrams was brave for not giving the fans the reunion they wanted. To me, it reads in a completely different way. I think Abrams was playing it safe. I don't think he actually knew what to do with the characters or to handle a reunion with them that would satisfy the general audience in Star Wars fandom. I think JJ was quite terrified by the task at hand, and who wouldn't be? Because imagine trying to flesh out, develop, or do something different with these characters that the audience hadn't seen for 30 years and it backfiring. Just look at the vitriol that the portrayal of Luke in The Last Jedi caused, a debate that is still going on. I think JJ was afraid of the task and feared the potential and sadly, due to the state of fandom, probably likely intense backlash it would receive if he failed. Imagine being the guy who ruined the original Star Wars trio, even though he is that guy. I would probably succumb to that fear as well. That's my take on it. Agree or disagree, it's all fine. Well, Tommy, what a cool letter. I like that letter. What do you guys think? Do you buy into that? Do you think Tommy is onto something? Or not? I don't know. That's what this channel is all about. Well, ladies and gentlemen, kind, gentle beings from all over the galaxy, this is now going to be the end of Robservations episode number 313. And as always, I want to thank my incredible moderating staff, starting with the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden. Facebook told me today that we were friends for 5 years. Thanks for your friendship, Mike. Very much appreciate it. I also want to thank, of course, the great Greg Smith. Who would have thought, Greg, that when I was in junior high school with you, that you and I would be doing this together, what? How many years later? Too many to count. I don't even want to think about it. But we're still talking Star Wars, bruh. So we're winning. And I'm singing Prince lyrics live on the internet. I also want to thank, of course, Detective Jim Boyers. Detective Jim keeping all of you on the straight and narrow. Stay away. Don't be a lawbreaker. Jim will know, and he will bring the banhammer, the wrench down on your head. And then, of course, we have Jordy Lyons and Lewis Yu, our newest members of the moderating staff. I want to thank them for being them and for giving their time. But most of all, I want to thank you, viewers, for watching this channel, to keep it alive. If I could ask you all to hit like, or as Davey504 says, slap like now. Davey504 is one of my favorite YouTubers. So, and he has nothing to do with the entertainment business aside from the fact that he plays the bass guitar And he loves the base. He loves the base as much as I love Star Trek. So I want to thank all of you for being great moderators. I want to thank this community of people for being who you are. Please check out the Post-Geek Singularity page on Facebook. Please go to the Burnettwork.net website. Send me letters. And if you want to send me videos, every week I'm going to string together those videos and make their own piece. Of course, I've had videos from Vesna, all the way from Sarajevo, Doug Root from Brooklyn, Mr. Suarez up in Portland. It's been great. And, of course, Stubble McShave. And since the people next door are mowing the grass or doing these kinds of things, I'm going to say goodbye to you all. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you, have a better day. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be on the... no, I'm not on the John Campea show tomorrow. Just so you know. Mark Fernandez from Collider's on the John Campea show tomorrow. Thanks very much.